What he said was that any peacekeeping troops that were deployed to Ukraine would not be protected under Article 5 of the NATO's founding treaty. Now, that's quite important because European allies were saying to me previously that they kind of expected if they were to be deployed to Ukraine, then the US would come to their defence. But clearly he's saying, well, actually, we won't, and it'll have to be a non-NATO mission. It'll have to be made up of European troops as well as non-European troops. And I think that's left everyone sort of wondering exactly where this force is going to come from if it's not going to have US troops and US backing.
The Ukraine Defence Contact Group, as it's called, that's a very big gathering of defence ministers and defence chiefs. They're meeting in Brussels, talking about, well, the defence of Europe and also about Ukraine, how to maybe look to an end of that war, which has gone on for nearly 3 years. It's made up of nearly of all the NATO member states and 25 other nations too. John Healey, Britain's Defence Secretary, is leading this. And the American new Defence Secretary, Pete Hegseth, he's of course there. He's made his presence felt. He had this to say.
We want, like you, a sovereign and prosperous Ukraine. But we must start by recognizing that returning to Ukraine's pre-2014 borders is an unrealistic objective. Chasing this illusionary goal will only prolong the war and cause more suffering. A durable peace for Ukraine must include robust security guarantees to ensure that the war will not begin again. This must not be Minsk 3.0. That said, the United States does not believe that NATO membership for Ukraine is a realistic outcome of a negotiated settlement. Instead, any security guarantee must be backed by capable European and non-European troops. If these troops are deployed as peacekeepers to Ukraine at any point, they should be deployed as part of a non-NATO mission, and they should not be covered under Article 5. There also must be robust international oversight of the line of contact. To be clear, as part of any security guarantee, there will not be U.S. troops deployed to Ukraine.
Well, the British Defence Secretary, John Healey, had this to say.
Secretary Hegseth, we hear you. We hear your commitment to NATO, to Article 5, to a sovereign Ukraine, and to your defence partnership with Europe. We also hear your concerns. On stepping up for Ukraine, we are and we will. On stepping up for European security, we are and we will. And you've just spoken about peace through strength. We are 50 nations strong here, all determined to put an end to Putin's war, to do so together.
That's the Defence Secretary, John Healey. Larisa Brown joins us, Defence Editor at The Times. Hello to you, Larisa.
Hello.
Hi. Well, I mean, Pete Hegseth, for a guy who's only been Secretary for Defence a matter of a very few weeks and his background is as a television host, he wasn't shy about laying down the law there, was he?
No, he wasn't. And it was quite interesting because everybody was incredibly nervous yesterday about what he might say today. And actually, I was speaking to someone in the UK Ministry of Defence earlier, and they were saying that actually everyone thought his comments weren't as strong as they had feared. And he also isn't leading the Defence Contact Group today, which America has led previously. He wanted the UK to step in and lead it. And someone had said to me that they thought he'd handed over the baton to Britain because he was sort of just getting into the role. But you're right, clearly he's managed to quite quickly, and he said some pretty profound things today, and clearly has got quite a few red lines when it comes to deploying peacekeeping troops in Ukraine.
Yeah, did we learn anything new about the view of the Trump administration when it comes to Ukraine and trying to find some sort of deal there?
We did. We learnt that he was saying that US troops won't be put on the ground in terms of any peacekeeping force. We kind of expected that. But then what he said was that any peacekeeping troops that were deployed to Ukraine would not be protected under Article 5 of the NATO's founding treaty. Now, that's quite important because European allies were saying to me previously that they kind of expected if they were to be deployed to Ukraine, then the US would come to their defence. But clearly he's saying, well, actually, we won't, and it'll have to be a non-NATO mission. It'll have to be made up of European troops as well as non-European troops. And I think that's left everyone sort of wondering exactly where this force is going to come from if it's
Yes.
not going to have US troops and US backing.
Right. And meanwhile, on the other side of the line, of that line in Ukraine, Larisa, you're reporting data which shows that Russia is now outspending the whole of Europe on defence.
Yes, we attended a briefing today. It's a military balance book, and it basically assesses every single military in the world and what everybody's been doing in the last year. And some really striking data. One example was they found that Germany's now spending more on defence than Britain, and so it's now the largest defence spender in Europe, whereas it wasn't last year. And of course, that information you've just mentioned about Russia spending more than the whole of Europe. So it's pretty worrying stuff if you're going to expect Europe to do its own defence in Ukraine and in Eastern Europe without the US help.
All right, Larisa Brown, defence editor at the Times, thank you so much. Now, I want to get the thoughts of Jim Townsend now, who's joined us live on the line. He's a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defence for European and NATO policy at the Pentagon. Hello to you, Jim.
Hello, great to see you.
Thanks for coming along. Let me ask you first of all about what the Secretary for Defence had to say about Ukraine. So, look, Ukraine is not going to be allowed to join NATO anytime soon. No surprise about that. If there is to be some sort of peace with maybe the line of battle being frozen, and that's not going to be policed by NATO, we kind of knew that too. It'll have to be some sort of coalition of the willing. But what about the idea that if that is set up, if there is a coalition of the willing defending that Ukrainian side, and there's some sort of attack from Russia, they're on their own. America won't be there for them. What do you make of that?
Well, it's a first in the sense that we've always done things together, the U.S. and Europe, whether it was a NATO operation or a non-NATO operation, we were in the fight together. And this is the first time that I can think of where we told Europe, okay, if something happens, you're on your own. We're not gonna be there. And I can only wonder that Putin must be quite happy with this concession by the United States, that we would say that we would say no NATO for Ukraine, no NATO membership, no NATO forces in Ukraine. It's going to be a European-only force, and the U.S. is not going to be engaged. Those are some pretty big concessions to Putin. And my question is, what did Putin give us in return?
Yeah, and well, again, I mean, the questions of what that means are still very, very big in the air. Donald Trump has yet to tell us anything very much about his idea, his plan, if he's got a plan for what happens after the fighting ends as a consequence of a deal. Have you an educated guess as to what that might look like?
Well, I think number one, there certainly have been a lot of conversations going on behind the scenes over the past couple of weeks between Washington and Moscow, and I think even Putin and Trump have spoken. I mean, we don't have any proof, but I think that's what's going on. And I think J.D. Vance, the vice president, when he addresses the Munich Security Conference, we might get closer to answering your question. But in terms of what this looks like, I just can't believe that the Russians would not go in for the whole loaf right now and say, look, I don't want just a frozen conflict. I want certain concessions my way, and bring out his old saw about a new European security architecture, U.S. troops out, NATO out. I just don't think that he would go in for just a ceasefire. And in terms of what he wants in terms of Ukraine, he doesn't want a strong Ukraine military either. So if he has a European force in there that over time gets fatigued, and there's not a strong Ukraine force there, and there's not the U.S., that certainly makes it easy pickings for the Russians down the road.
Yeah.
So, we'll just have to see. We're going to know more, I think, at the Munich Security Conference.
Okay, which is hopefully no more at the end of the year. But you suggest that Vladimir Putin may be quite pleased with what he's been hearing from the American side so far. Now, what about the defence of Europe? I mean, it's fair to say that Donald Trump's pressure on Europe to spend more has yielded results. More is being spent more. In some cases, really quite a lot more. But again, that to many looks like evidence that Donald Trump is just keen to disengage from America's historic role as a pillar of Western defence in Europe.
Well, I think he is keen to turn the U.S. attention and focus militarily to Asia, to the Asia Pacific and to China. I think most of the people in his administration, that's their goal. And I think it seems over the past couple of weeks, he hasn't so much tried to walk away from the U.S. being a pillar in terms of European security as much as walk away from the idea that we won't be the only pillar. And that the European pillar has got to be stronger because it's got to take over as we face the Indo-Pacific. So, and also, I think really it's Putin, I think, that's really caused Europe to spend more. I do know that over the past couple of weeks, a lot of my European contacts have certainly talked about making sure they don't get into the crosshairs of Trump because they're not spending enough. So you're right, there is pressure from Trump coming down, and it is having impact. But that impact is I think, to my mind, is he wants to turn his attention to China and leave Europe to the Europeans.
Jim Townsend, great to talk to you, the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense at the Pentagon.